Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and today is Wednesday, February 25th, 2015. Be sure to check out our website at www.arh.noaa.gov, or you can still call in on our information line at 1-800-472-0391. And on our webpage, you can always find the YouTube, Twitter, Facebook links on our social media page. So let's start with the cold topics of the day. Across the northern areas of this state, we have warnings across much of the northwest. The western Arctic coastal areas and the western Brooks Range are under a blizzard warning with winter storm warnings just to the south across to the Bering Strait locations. Now these are going to produce snow across this area between 6 to 10 inches, and across the Brooks Range area possibilities up between 1 to 2 feet of snow. Also reduced visibilities with gusting winds between 40 to 50 miles per hour, with the strongest winds along the Arctic coastal areas up to 65 miles per hour. And then across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, we have winter storm advisories, and this is for blowing snow. Reduced visibilities down to 1/2 mile. The blowing snow in this area will probably not accumulate. Very light snow, if any accumulation at all. Just plenty of snow to blow around across the eastern areas of the northeastern areas of this state. So these are going to be running through Friday morning, and a little bit longer conditions across the Brooks Range area through Saturday. For some of the locations, we'll still have to tweak these conditions as a very strong frontal boundary remains along that location across as we head into the beginning of the weekend. Now looking out towards the west, you can see in just a moment here, I'll put this into motion, a stream of moisture that's coming up through the Bering, which is then tracking up towards the northwestern coast. And this is what's going to be providing all the moisture. And once this front starts moving a little bit further to the east, we'll see snow accumulations across the western Brooks Range there. So here's the large plume coming up from the North Pacific, and that's going to be causing unsettled weather all across the Bering Sea and much of the Aleutians as we head into tomorrow. Now looking closer to the mainland, areas across the south central and the southwestern areas back towards the Alaska Peninsula did see some breaks in the clouds finally today after some very active weather. The southeast, however, there's a low pressure system that's moving towards the southeast now, brings some rainfall just in this area heading towards Sitka. So this area, mainly rain across the eastern areas of the Bering and the central locations of the state. We have some moisture through here, and the upper level disturbance had brought some scattered shower activity through the central areas of the state. However, this clearing should be moving off through the evening, so they should see a drying out pattern. Now here's the surface map from earlier today. We have a weaker low pressure system here, just a 1011 millibar pressure system beginning to break up as it pushes inland into the southeast. Well, this was bringing some rain mainly across the Gulf waters this afternoon. Meanwhile, we have some ridging that's moving into the southwestern areas of the state, all the way up into the central interior. And then here's the front with the very tightly packed pressure gradient that extends all the way down into the central area of the Aleutians. So we have snow occurring all across the northwestern areas, and of course the reduced visibilities, the blowing snow across these areas. And then a changeover of the precipitation just near the central areas of the Bering. St. Paul and St. George were still in the rainier conditions, but not seeing much accumulating this afternoon. And also light rain conditions extended just to the south of the central Aleutians along that very moist plume. And here's low pressure system across the eastern areas of Russia, and another one coming in right behind it. So this will be keeping this gradient very tight across the area as we head in to the overnight hours. So not much change. You can see along this front, it remains stationary across the northwestern coastal areas. So some moisture may be moving out through towards the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, but they won't see any accumulations because the snow will be very light in those locations as we have a very dry air mass that's entrenched across the central areas of this state. So high pressure, 1035 millibar high pressure ridge is very extreme, and this will keep things dry all across the south central area. So again, for tonight, we'll see some patchy fog conditions developing across the Copper River Basin, the Prince William Sound, and all the way back through the southwest. And then as for the eastern areas, the Gulf waters, they'll see continued rain showers during the overnight time frame as this low pressure system pushes inland, and it'll begin to weaken for overnight. Then some lighter shower activity will remain as this low pressure system continues on a southeasterly track, and then we'll see some patchy fog conditions across the south central areas and southwestern areas for Thursday morning, and then that should improve by the afternoon. So it should be a mostly sunny day across the southern half of the state, while this gradient across the northwest brings gusty winds in these locations with low pressure moving in just a little bit closer to the northwestern coast here. So continued travel problems through your Thursday for the northwest. Also, with the building ridge across the northern eastern Gulf here, we'll see some outflow winds develop across the Copper River Delta and some of the areas across Prince William Sound. So offshore flow will be occurring there. Mainly quiet conditions across the southwest as benign weather settles in with this ridging moving towards Kodiak Island. Like I said, unsettled pattern will remain across the Bering with a mix of rain and snow showers, and gusty winds between 30 and 40 miles per hour should begin to relax a little bit as another ridge moves into the Bering, but still gusting across the central Aleutians between the two pressure systems. And then it'll bring colder air along when this low pressure system begins to track further to the east. We'll see a 1,002 millibar low just strengthen slightly from the previous day, and this will bring rain showers across the Alaska Peninsula area and possibly into Kodiak by the afternoon hours. But will still remain clear across much of south central and might have some ongoing issues with the fog across the Copper River Basin. And then by Friday evening, we'll probably see things start to taper down across the areas of the Brooks Range, but still keeping snowier conditions across the northwestern Arctic coast. Now for the southeastern areas, they'll be getting in on the ridge stretching across the southeast, and so they should see a nice drier day for your Friday forecast. Now taking a look at temperatures today, the southeast was in the warmer area between 40 to 45 degrees mainly across the southeast, and then all across the Gulf waters 40 degrees, with the warmest across the southern end of Kodiak. AKwx reporting 48 degrees this afternoon. Across the interior, not too bad. Temperatures still warmer than average in the mid-20s. And then across the Arctic coastal areas, they saw temperatures ranging from the upper teens towards the Seward Peninsula. They were near 25 degrees. Arctic Village was the coldest this afternoon at 7 degrees. And then across the southwestern areas of the state, mainly in the 30s and in the lower 40s near the Alaska Peninsula, and the upper 30s for the Aleutians and the Bering. For tonight, your temperatures are going to be coldest across eastern areas of the state, and then remain warmer across the north and western areas in the upper teens and 20s. Along the Gulf waters, where we'll see temperatures dropping down into the upper teens to mid-20s. Southeast will be in the lower 30s, as well as the Bering and the Aleutians will all be in the upper 30s. Now we'll see high temperatures tomorrow, again in the lower to mid-40s for the southeast and across the Alaska Peninsula and the Gulf waters. Coolest along the Arctic Village again in the single digits. Everywhere else will be warmer than normal in the lower 20s to lower 30s across the western coast. Now taking a look at your flying weather conditions across the state, main concern is going to be MVFR to IFR conditions across the frontal areas from the Aleutians all the way up to the Bering Strait and the Arctic coast. Now the southeast might see some lingering MVFR issues as that low pressure system brings some lower level clouds as it moves in. But once that low pressure clears, conditions will improve later in the day. Now your passes in more depth, MVFR in Atuvik and Adigan Pass, and we'll see clear conditions at Lake Charles and Merrill Pass. For rainy, expect VFR, and Windy Pass will be VFR. Isabel will also be VFR and Mentasta VFR. South Central is going to be all VFR for Tanita and Portage, and Chilkoot and White Pass should be VFR tomorrow. Now looking at your freezing levels, the freezing level is still hanging across the northern Gulf Coast here and back into the Bering Strait. So impressive for this time of the year, the freezing surface levels to be up to the Bering Strait, and then the 2,000 foot level across the Aleutian chain and 6,000 foot just to the south of the Aleutians. And here we have the 2,000 foot level across the northern Gulf and creeping up to 6,000 by the southern Gulf areas. Now for your icing tomorrow, a little bit of a concern between 2,000 and 6,000 feet across the southeast, and then below 3,000 feet with the most severe conditions across the Bering Strait and back towards the central area of the Aleutians. Now your jet stream for tomorrow, we have a ridge building across this state, and we have the strongest jet out here in the western Bering at 125 to 135 knots. Looking at your lower levels, here's the ridge building in, strongest winds across the central areas of the Bering with the onshore flow at 40 to 50 knots across most of the state, and then an offshore flow across the panhandle areas between 20 and 25 knots. Very similar at the surface, you'll see 3,000 foot level with the ridge moving over towards the southeast here with onshore flow between 20 and 40 knots. The strongest is going to be out over the Bering, however, out of the south at 50 knots. So putting that all together, the wind conditions for tomorrow are going to be most turbulent across the central areas of the Bering and on up towards the northwest coast. So once again, if you're going to be going out tomorrow, you want to be very aware of the low visibilities, IFR, and gusty winds between 40 and 50 knots. In just a moment, we'll be back with your marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often at this point, we don't have much to say in that, because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Toman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the show, and here we have the ice map up. There have been no changes since yesterday, but perhaps with the warming, as we go through the weekend, maybe we'll see the Cook Inlet begin to recede a little bit more. Now on to your marine forecast across the southeast. We'll see some northerly flow across the areas with the strongest flow across the inner channels between 15 and 30 knot, changing out of the southeast direction towards the Dixon entrance and then out of the northeast across the outer waters with mainly a northerly flow between 15 and 20 knots. Inside channels we'll see seas between 3 to 6 feet, highest across the northern Lynn Canal, and then your outside waters will be around 7 feet. And then for your Friday forecast, more of a westerly flow to northwesterly flow across the outer waters with between 15 and 20 knots, and lighter winds across the inner channels between 15 and 20 knots. Change of direction from north to south towards the Dixon entrance. And then your seas will be between 3 to 4 feet across the inner waters and between 4 to 7 feet across the outside waters. Taking a look at the western Gulf locations, Prince William Sound, we have variable wind for tomorrow at 10 knots with seas at 2 feet, gustier winds across some of the bays and passes here, and then across the western Gulf locations between 10 and 20 knot winds out of the west and northwest. And then along the Cook Inlet, we see a variable wind becoming more northerly as you head towards the south, and variable back again towards the Shelikof Strait. Now seas will be between 2 feet for Prince William Sound, and then between 7 and 8 feet across the western Gulf locations, 2 feet across Shelikof Strait, and 2 to 3 feet across the Cook Inlet and Barren Islands. Friday's forecast, light winds again across much of the area, a variable 10 knots across the northern areas of the Gulf and Prince William Sound, northerly flow across the Cook Inlet between 10 and 15 knots, down towards the Shelikof Strait, and then we'll see a change of direction out of the west and south near the Kodiak Island location, small craft just to the south of Kodiak Island at 25 knots, and then 4 to 7 foot seas once again across the western Gulf locations and between 2 to 4 feet across the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet, and the Shelikof Strait. Looking at Alaska Peninsula, mainly a southerly flow for tomorrow between 10 and 20 knots, variable on the southeastern side of the peninsula, and then 1 foot across the Bristol Bay area for seas tomorrow, and 7 feet as you head towards the Cold Bay locations, and then 6 feet across the Pacific side. Friday, you'll see a pickup of winds between 20 and 30 knots with a little bit lighter winds just on the southeast peninsula here, 5 foot seas across the Bering and 9 foot seas across the Pacific side. And then your Thursday marine forecast across the Aleutians, the strongest winds will be in these locations and gale criteria. Out of the south and southwest, winds will be around 35 knots and a little bit lighter speeds. Small craft towards the east between 20 and 30 knots. Seas across the Bering side will be between 10 and 15 feet, strongest or highest across the Shimea locations, and between 7 to 16 feet as you head towards the central Aleutians. And looking at your Friday forecast, a change of wind direction across the western areas of the Bering and Aleutians out of the northwest around 25 knots. So lighter speeds on Friday expected. Change of wind direction out to the southeasterly location as you head towards the east. Northerly flow will be kind of strong across those central Aleutians between 20 and 30 knots. Across the rest of the Bering, we'll see between 25 and 35 knot winds out of the south, with the strongest gale winds across the northern areas, and seas will be between 13 and 14 feet across the central and northern areas, and as you head towards the coastal areas, around 3-foot seas. For your Friday forecast, a southerly wind direction across the entire area between 20 and 25 knots, and seas across the central areas will be around 8 feet and then 3 feet as you head towards the western coast. Across the Arctic coastal areas, strongest winds will be around Kotzebue Sound out of the south-southwest, and then as you round the Chukchi Sea, it's still maintaining a southwesterly flow, and 30 knots will continue across the eastern Beaufort seacoast through Friday, and then a little bit lighter wind speed out of the west. And now just to recap your forecast, once again, we have the strong front with blizzard warnings and winter storm warnings for blowing snow, reducing visibilities down to near zero in some locations, very heavy snow across the western Brooks Range, lighter snow to the eastern Beaufort seacoast, but still reduced visibilities in that area. Rain will taper off across the southeast as we head into your day on Thursday, with patchy fog developing across areas of the south central and southwest, and then should clear by and have another sunny day across much of the southern locations, with very gusty, windy conditions hanging on through much of the Bering locations through Friday. As this front begins to advance, things will taper off across much of the Bering, and then snow conditions will continue, however, for the northwest. So stay tuned for updates on those blizzard warnings and the advisories across the east.
These
Thank you.
forecasts are
Have a
to
good
be
night.
used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.